Welcome to the Low Carb MD Podcast. No one is beyond help. No one is beyond hope. Nothing said on the Low Carb MD Podcast is medical advice. Please consult your own doctor before making any lifestyle changes.
Hello and welcome back to the Low Carb MD Podcast. Tro, our guest is making us jealous already. She's out in the sun. That might have something to do with what we're talking about today. Maybe nature's important after all. What do you think, Tro?
I think we should give our listeners a little bit of backstory. So the little bit of backstory is this, that, we've been looking into the data regarding our light environment, microbiome, and one of the foremost experts and a guy who I just love on social media, Dr. Jack Cruz. I contacted him and we had a discussion and he said, look, Tro, there's somebody even smarter than me. There's somebody even, who knows the data even better than me. And he's like, and she's in your neck of the woods, my neck of the woods being the, New York, New Jersey area, Brian. And he's like, you got to get her on. So Dr. Alexis Cowan is our guest today, and she did her PhD at Princeton. She did her postdoc at UPenn, and she's an absolute beast on Instagram, talking about everything for health optimization, light environment, microbiome, nutraceuticals, and more. And Brian, I'm just excited that we have the real deal on today. Somebody who could sort of expand our horizons a little bit on this topic that I don't think gets appreciated enough.
Yeah, I'm so excited. Doc, thanks for joining us. Help us out. Help us figure out life. Us docs are locked in little cages most of our life inside in hospitals and little rooms and things like that. So share us, how did you get into this field in the first place? Like, what was your inspiration? What path did you follow to get here?
Yeah, first of all, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here. And I don't think it's actually by accident that you're locked in rooms like that in different fields in medicine and, in education in schools. And we can talk about the effect of these indoor artificial lights on kids and ADHD rates and things like this. But as far as my path goes, I had a lot of illnesses as a kid. So I was very sick as a child. I had like a very traumatic dental surgery when I was 2 years old. I had chronic recurring strep throat in first grade. Shortly thereafter, I was basically in a house with mold this entire time, and I got put on a bunch of antibiotics. My weight started ballooning when I went back to school in third grade after being homeschooled for a year and a half. I weighed like double my classmates. That continued to spiral out of control up through sophomore year of high school. I weighed something around 270 pounds, joined a gym, started counting calories, was primarily eating processed foods because they're easy to count, and I lost 100 pounds over the course of a year. But in the process, I gained an eating disorder, and shortly thereafter as well, IBS. And that was really my initiation onto my healing path, I would say. During this time, I was also transferring from actually being in culinary school to going into the sciences and studying biochemistry and mathematics at Moravian College, a small school in PA. And I was really figuring out kind of how to tie in my studies in biochemistry with my direct experience and just really digging into online resources at the time, just trying to figure out other people's experiences and what I could try. I ended up trying an elimination diet and basically curing my IBS overnight. I found that dairy was a major trigger for me, and I stayed off of dairy for years. At some point along this path, I was in complete remission. I started at Princeton. I found Joel Green's work, The Immunity Code, and really started getting into the microbiome and targeted microbiome modulation for specific health outcomes. I then basically did some rehabbing of my microbiome and trained my body to be able to eat dairy again, which I can do now still freely. But it took a long time. It took like over a year, I would say, of like really targeted specific intervention. But then, so I graduated Princeton in 2021. It was a very tumultuous time. I started my business in January of 2022. Graduated in 2021, lost my mom in December of 2021. So it was like everything changed basically overnight.
Wow.
And so I was kind of in a tough spot throughout of 2022, honestly. Like I started my business, I was working with clients for the first time, really just getting my feet wet in like the more interpersonal aspects of healing journeys and how individualized things need to be. At the same time, we do need to highlight the importance of just basic biological needs for human beings. And so I think that's a lot of things that we can talk about in this conversation, especially as it relates to light. There's certain non-negotiables that we have as a species that we're not tending to. But I dealt with a lot of health issues that year just from like the trauma of losing my mom and like just a lot of change happening at once. And so, I feel like the healing journey is never like over, that's how it kind of seems for me. But at some point along this trail, I ran into Dr. Jack Kruse's work through the Huberman and Rubin podcast on Rick Rubin's podcast Tetragrammaton. That was in April of 2023. And my entire life changed overnight, essentially. Everything he was saying just resonated with me at a very deep level. And on one hand, I was pissed. I was like, I wasn't taught any of this. And like, how did this evade me? Because I was aware of circadian biology, but for some reason, it just wasn't emphasized as being this very foundational aspect of biology and of human health that was like being ignored. It was just like some kind of fun, interesting thing. But the way that Jack presented it, I realized very, like at a very deep level that this was something that was very true and very missed. And so I started changing my lifestyle overnight. For the first time in my life, I became a morning person instead of a night owl. And I thought that was just, I was a night owl. I thought that was my thing. And that was just my chronotype. But turns out, I think that's more of a modern manifestation of our tech use and not something that's innate to our biology. And then, after seeing such dramatic changes in my own sleep quality, my recovery, my energy levels, my workouts, I started working out outside in the sun, barefoot in the grass, and just seeing this immense fortitude and increased work capacity and reduced recovery time. And I was like, this is just insane. And so I started teaching it to my clients. I started teaching it through courses in my business. And then I was also doing a postdoc at the time, which was completely unrelated. And I was like, I just kind of need to, I only did my postdoc for a year because I was like, I need to just kind of phase out and really just dive in on this topic because it's the most important thing nobody's talking about. And then I connected with Jack directly at that point, and he's kind of become a very close mentor of mine over the past like year and a half. And I'm going down to visit next month at the end of the month to see him. And I'm going to be meeting with Nicole Shanahan as well. We had a call couple weeks ago to work on some research projects together. And so now my goal is really to disseminate this information. I feel like that's the most important thing I can do after having dived into the literature and really synthesizing these ideas to myself and also directly experiencing them, that now it's time to really get this message out, especially ahead of the election, because I think we know that Bobby is clued onto this stuff, RFK Jr., because Jack is working directly with him and they've had many conversations. And so I think the more that we can get this information into the zeitgeist and into the minds of the American population, the more that we'll be able to see like how we're really being cut off at the knees at so many levels by our governments, by our institutions, and how we actually have an immense ability to do something about it.
Geez, where to
That's
start?
that's huge stuff. I mean, that's so huge. And like from our perspective, we're kind of blown away by Callie Means and Casey Means, how they just popped up on the scene. They're working with Kennedy too, and they're talking about metabolic health. And we watched during, your traumatic time during the lockdowns, which was a lot of us had traumatic times during that time, not being able to socialize and get out and do things we wanted to do or travel, those kind of things. We saw the immense impact on health, and especially, for us, we look at it and say, I looked at it at least, and I know Tro did too. It's like the worst thing you could have done to the seniors, lock them in a little room, don't let them socialize, don't let them see another human face, let them eat Twinkies every morning to feel better and not have any social interactions, and put them in a dark room and not exercise. You go, okay, if I want to kill someone, that's a perfect scheme to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jack on his recent podcast with Danny Jones really laid out this story very nicely about how, hypothetically, if you were to want to reduce the burden on your system and avoid paying back Social Security and retirement funds to an aging population, what do? Like, you can actually eliminate the problem and reduce the ability of you actually have to pay back that money that doesn't actually exist, because, he says and lays out quite nicely that, this is most likely a money laundering scheme that you can't actually pull out like all of your money at one time. Like if you wanted all your Social Security, it's not even there. Same with your IRAs. Like you can't actually pull that out because it's not really there. And basically he was saying that the only way to taper a Ponzi scheme like this is to reduce the carbon that's actually desiring that money back. So I think it's a pretty compelling, there's a lot, obviously we know the military industrial complex, the pharmaceutical industrial complex is very real things. They have an immense amount of pull within our society on what's thought of as like good quality information versus misinformation, for example. There's so much stress on our First Amendment rights right now, which is like extremely insane because a lot of the propaganda and the rhetoric during the pandemic was said as misinformation and now is known as a fact. So who is actually deciding what is real and what is good information and who is not? I think that's a real problem that we're facing right now. And I don't think there's enough emphasis being placed on in the mainstream, obviously, because mainstream media is part of the problem. They're not going to be part of that solution.
Well, just this morning, there was someone posted, they posted today this new article, Troy, you probably saw it. They said over $1 billion was spent from pharma influencing the peer reviewers for articles. And you go, holy cow, that is unreal that we could allow this to happen. And I mean, the corruption that we've seen, it's just so unbelievable. So what do we do to fix this stuff? All of us stressed out people watching the election with the anticipation and anxiety and all that stuff, glued to the TV, getting these Blu-rays all the time. What's your solution to this that you've learned over this last year and a half of really focusing on this area?
Hold on.
Yeah,
before
so
the solution, can
Okay.
you define the problem for our listeners? Because I think, before we walk into the solution, educate us on exactly the problem, because I know sort of the hormonal underpinnings of how blue light affects us, and I know some of the impacts of the microbiome on systemically. So just help us understand what the problems are, the big problems you see.
Yeah, so I mean, the way that I usually frame this conversation is first by starting how our current environment is differing from the ancestral environment, let's say. And I think this is where we can really highlight the problem. So if we think about pre-1890s, there was no electrical grid, there was no electricity in the homes. This is like, just over 100 and some odd years ago. This isn't a very long time ago. And just to highlight, like, evolution occurs over the course of like millions of years, not tens of years, not hundreds of years. So we have not had a chance to adapt to this. And I would argue that our biology can't really adapt to this, and we'll get into why that is. But prior to the electrification of indoor spaces, our primary source of light comes from the sun. And that's how our biology was designed to interface with the environment. So sunlight has a myriad of different types of light within it, different colors of light. The one that's stable throughout the day is really the red and infrared part of the spectrum. So midday sun is about 50% red and infrared light. Sunrise, sunset is like over 80% red and infrared light. And this red and infrared light can directly penetrate into the body and directly stimulate the mitochondria, which are these energy and water producing organelles within cells that all of our cells in our body essentially rely on to make energy. The only exception would be adult red blood cells, which lack mitochondria, but all the other cells in the body require mitochondria to make the energy and the metabolic water that they need to actually sustain their function. So the red and infrared light directly stimulate that. Now, outside of red and infrared light, we also have UV light and we have blue light. And these are kind of the main frequencies I like to focus on when we're thinking about differences between the modern day light environment and the ancestral light environment. So blue light and UV light tend to vary throughout the day, let's say. So UV light the most so, because it's the shortest wavelength that can be scattered the most by the atmosphere. So when the sun is at a very low angle, sunrise, sunset, that's mostly being scattered, especially depending on the time of year. Obviously in the wintertime, where places like where we live, all of the UV light is getting scattered at some point in like the deep of winter. But at other times of year, like during the summer, you're getting more UV light penetration because of the Earth's angle. So UV light is basically null in the morning, and then it starts to rise up. There's something called UVA rise that occurs this time of year. It's like an hour to an hour and a half after sunrise. So that's when UVA light starts coming into the picture. UVB light comes in shortly thereafter, maybe within another 30 minutes. And then midday sun, you're getting the most UV light. Blue is also at its peak during the middle of the day. And the UV and blue light are actually really important. But maybe the most important thing to note here is that even though midday sun is about 25% blue light, and maybe during the summertime around 10% or less UV light, it's always present with an abundance of red and infrared light. So in nature, we never encounter blue light without an abundance of red and infrared, because as it turns out, blue light actually has the opposite effect on mitochondria that red and infrared do. Blue light, when it interacts with mitochondria in your skin, eyes, and proximal brain regions, actually impairs mitochondrial flux, mitochondrial energy metabolism. And so it makes sense that in nature, we always have all of that red and infrared light to help counteract those effects. We'll get into more about why that's important in the modern day in a little bit. But first on UV light. So UV light is probably the most demonized of the light spectrum, and albeit is probably the most important when it comes to our biological function. So UVB light, which is definitely the most demonized, and we can talk about the links with skin cancer, because I think there's a whole ton of propaganda on this, where actually the literature shows that the more chronic, regular, daily sun exposure you get, the lower your risk of melanoma. Outdoor workers have a lower risk of melanoma than indoor workers. Vitamin D status, where vitamin D deficiency is highly associated with melanoma status, vitamin D being this biomarker of your UVB light exposure. There's so many pieces of evidence that really kind of disentangle the skin cancer and UVB light link, especially in the case of melanoma. But outside of that, UVB light, of course, makes vitamin D, like I just mentioned, but it also stimulates the production of this pro-hormone called pro-opiomelanocortin, or POMC, and it stimulates the production in the skin via these UVB rays and through in the brain via the eyes. And POMC gets cleaved into 10 distinct hormonal products. Importantly, in order to unlock the full repertoire of these 10 products, you have to receive UVB light onto your skin and into your eyes, because POMC can be stimulated by like insulin and leptin in certain parts of the brain, for example, but you can only unlock it's like 6 of the products of the 10 and not all of them in that case. So in order to unlock the full repertoire, we need to get full spectrum UVB light in our skin and eyes. Of course, what do most people do when they go outside? They slop the sunscreen. They wear their contact glasses, sunglasses outside, so nobody's getting this. And you'll understand why this is important when I talk about how among these 10 cleavage products, 3 of them are alpha, beta, and gamma endorphins, which are the endogenous opioid molecules that not only reduce anxiety and depression, but improve cognition, learning, and memory, reduce pain, increase overall baseline dopamine levels to make you feel just at a higher level at baseline. And we see the kind of the product in the modern day of crashing and burned out dopamine systems with this constant urge to reach for quick hits of dopamine, whether it's from junk food, whether it's from junk media, whether it's from pornography, whether it's from drugs and alcohol. Like, all of these things are things that our body wants when we're not cruising at altitude dopamine wise, let's say. So that's the endorphin part of the story. We also have the alpha, beta, and gamma melanocyte stimulating hormone, or MSH, which are the three of the other products from the POMC cleavage. Alpha, beta, and gamma MSH not only, as the name implies, stimulates melanin production in melanocytes to make you basically make new melanin and tan in response to the sun, but they also directly work in the hypothalamus, in particular alpha MSH, to suppress appetite and increase energy expenditure. So you could, if you're thinking about like weight loss, let's say metabolic health and mitochondrial health, we can kind of really see that's like the holy grail, right? Because if you want to maintain healthy body composition, healthy metabolic status, you want to essentially, eat less and burn more. And your body has this natural thermostat in the form of the hypothalamus to make that happen. But the problem is, if we're never synthesizing the alpha, beta, gamma, MSH, and we're constantly basically always feeling a poor satiating effect, we're always feeling like we need to reach for another, bite to eat, let's say. That's compounded with the fact that if you're eating highly processed foods, those are also hijacking your reward centers in your brain to make you want to eat more. Now we can really see very clearly why the combination of not getting enough UV light, leading to elevations in appetite and decreased energy expenditure in combination with these hyperpalatable foods, in combination then with an excess of blue light, which comes to the problem, which we'll talk about in the modern environment, and we'll get to that in a sec, which impairs mitochondrial function. Now we're getting this state where we don't have mitochondria on board that are able to actually deal with the energy coming into the body. And now instead it's getting stored. This, of course, also ties into the leptin story, which we can get into. But I first want to just make sure I'm answering your question fully. And let's define the problem now, because we've kind of now painted the picture of the importance of UV light, the importance of blue light in its natural state, all of this balance within the spectrum of the sun. Now, in the modern day, most people are sitting inside behind glass. Glass filters out all of UVB light, about 30% of UVA, and basically all of infrared light, because they're now coded to be more energy efficient. And what I really like to say is energy efficiency and technology is driving an energy crisis in the human body, because we actually need UV light and infrared light in order to have functioning metabolism. Those are the two most important frequencies for the human body. In photosynthesis, 400 to 700 nanometer light, blue and red light are really important for photosynthesis in plants. In human photosynthesis and human energy metabolism, red, infrared, and UV light are the stars of the show. So if we're sitting inside behind glass, we're automatically essentially concentrating blue light and becoming blue light toxic just without putting a single light or device screen in your face. Then on top of that, we turn on our energy efficient LED and fluorescent bulbs, which are highly enriched in blue light and deficient in red and infrared light. On top of that, we're sitting on device screens, which are also highly enriched in blue light, devoid of red and infrared light. Infrared light, another word for that is heat. So in the tech world, heat is seen as a waste product because it's not contributing to the visible light spectrum. However, it is an essential nutrient for the human body, this infrared light. It's not being acknowledged as such. So when we're sitting on our tech inside under our artificial lights, we are blasting our bodies with high amounts of blue light in the absence of red and infrared light, in turn directly negatively impairing our energy metabolism, our mitochondrial function. And there was even a study out earlier this year showing that just 15 minutes of deep red photobiomodulation on the shoulder for 15 minutes was shown to reduce the blood sugar response to an oral glucose tolerance test by 30% 45 minutes later. Now, I like to say, imagine if you're just taking your meals outside and now you're leveraging not only 670 nanometer deep red light, you're leveraging the entire solar spectrum from red out to far infrared. And that's all acting in concert with every mitochondria in your body to help facilitate glucose clearance, facilitate energy metabolism, help you to clear excess substrates from the blood, and help to just keep you metabolically healthy and mitochondrially equipped. And so that would be like the medium to long version, but let me know if you have questions now.
I got 15. So Brian, who's going first?
Awesome stuff. No, you go, Tro. I'll let you go first, man, because mine will be smarter.
So I want to like step back because I think most people listening to this, right, the first instinct their brain has is like this light stuff, it's woo woo, and they discount it, right? It's discounted. And it's interesting, I had some patients with medically unexplained symptoms, burning tongue, insulin, impaired glucose tolerance, otherwise unexplained, right? And you dig into the literature, healing in general, chronic pain syndromes, and you dig into the literature and you see this area of literature that's now burgeoning, and it's low light therapy, and it's basically all the data on red light, infrared light being used as therapy, literally curing things that people had no cures for. This one condition, burning mouth syndrome, affects postmenopausal women, and the treatment is take a benzodiazepine. That's the treatment. Mouthwash with benzodiazepines. And this laser, which stimulates the nerves to basically reheal the body, to reheal, it improved. It actually beat out in a double, in a controlled study, which looked at laser, sham laser, and benzodiazepine. It beat it out. And it just made me think, like, hold on, gosh, let me wait a second, because this is real. And the people listening to this who are like discounting it, start paying attention, right? And I'm talking to myself. So can you give us, an idea now that we've highlighted the problem, which is, hey, we're missing this healing substance that we've used for thousands of years, and we're introducing a toxic substance, that we are not accustomed at the doses we're getting them. Can you talk to people about what are the things you've seen, heal from focusing on getting good light?
Yeah. So, I mean, this is really where we can introduce the topic of circadian biology, because the primary zeitgebers or time setters or time givers of the circadian clocks in the body are light and dark. So that's actually a really important thing to highlight. Light isn't the most important thing in the body. Dark isn't the most important thing. They're both the most important. You need both in order to have a healthy circadian rhythm. And why is that important? Well, circadian biology and the circadian rhythm sets a whole, like the expression of thousands of different genes, different processes in the body that are supposed to occur at different times of day, are all regulated in a circadian manner. So what that means is you're supposed to get light from the sun during the day, and you're supposed to get darkness at night. Now, we're not doing either of those things. We're not getting sun during the day. We're inside under artificial light during the day, and we're also blasting ourselves with artificial light at night. And so what that means is our body's actually never experiencing good bright light during the day or darkness at night, and it's completely dysregulating that system. At a very superficial level, we can look at the melatonin system, and it's a pretty good example of this, because melatonin release from the pineal gland is directly impaired by blue light exposure. And this is problematic. And we can also look at the copious amounts of data showing that breast cancer incidence and severity is associated with artificial light exposure at night. There's thought to be a link with circulating melatonin levels, but that doesn't mean go out and supplement it, because we can't miss the point here that the light and dark cycles are regulating much, much more than just melatonin release. But that's also not to say that making sure that you're getting dark exposure at night isn't really important for melatonin, because it is. Mitigating your blue light exposure at night in particular is going to be the most important thing that you can do to help with your sleep quality, your recovery. And of course, sleep itself is just a really important aspect of health. We know that even sleep depriving young, healthy people for a week makes them insulin resistant. So if you think about most people, a lot of people are undersleeping chronically. And that's going to take a toll on their metabolic health. But outside of that, even if you, let's say you work a job or you're a new parent and you can't get as much sleep as you want, the light dark cycles are independently important outside of sleep from this circadian perspective. So what can somebody do if they're, up at night and they need to be up for that reason? Well, at the very least, you can block blue light. You can either use red light bulbs in your house. You can put filters on your device screens. You can wear blue blocking glasses, the good kind that have a dark orange lens that block 100% of blue light. That can at least keep the signal into your body that like blue light is low, that it's nighttime. Of course, any light at all is suboptimal, but if we're going to look at like the spectrum of optimal to the worst possible outcome, then blocking blue light is going to provide a decent amount of benefit, especially when it comes to maintenance of the circadian rhythm and melatonin status, because that blue light directly impairs melatonin secretion. We want to make sure the melatonin levels are, elevating at night, and they're remaining elevated because that's basically bathing all the tissues of the body in this external regulator of the circadian clocks. It's a signal to the cells of the body that it's dark out. And that's really important. In particular, that signal is mostly the most important aspect of that signal is being sent to the brain. So there's something in the brain called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, or the SCN. It's the master clock that runs a little bit faster than every other clock in every other cell of the body. All the body cells have clocks, but this master clock, the SCN, is the one that tells all of the other cells what time of day it is. And so that's what's really picking up on the blue light in the environment. It's meant to receive blue light during the day to signal to the body that it's daytime, that it's time to be awake, alert, to be digesting food, to be cognitively sharp. And when there's no blue light in the environment, when it's dark, that's a sign to the body to go into rest, regeneration, recovery mode, engage stem cells, engage repair of tissues and injury repair and things like this. If we're never exposing ourselves to dark, we're not getting into that regenerative state. And there's even literature showing that even very low levels of light in the sleeping environment, less than 100 lux, are enough to significantly increase basal glucose, circulating glucose levels the next morning, increase total insulin resistance, decrease heart rate variability, a sign of nervous system regulation, the next day. And now if you think about people sleeping with like night lights on or TVs on in their bedrooms that are getting this light all day, every day, now we can really see the knock-on effects of that over time. And so this blue light at night is really something that can be mitigated quite easily. And it's, relatively cheap as well. And as it relates to like sunlight during the day, that's absolutely free. Even if you can just take little breaks and get outside, just get some of that natural light in your eyes, it's going to be really important. Midday sun on a clear day like this is like up to 300,000 lux. The most you're going to get in an indoor environment is around 1,000 lux, and most are even less than that. So our bodies are really meant to get bright light during the day. It's really, really important for the regulation of the circadian rhythm. A lot of people focus on blocking light at night and making it dark at night, which is also important, but they're both equally important when it comes to really getting the circadian health dialed in.
Yeah, and it may sound crazy to people, but if you go camping, you go for a hike in the morning, you're out in the sun all day, like you're sitting there at the campfire, you go, what time is it? Oh, it's 6:30. 6:30. I'm exhausted, because it's dark and you get, you're in nature and you're calm and everything's fun and all that. So it's pretty, like we really are out of touch. Like if you go to a lot of the poorer communities, like farming communities in Guatemala, and you see that they're like going to bed early, they get up early, and so it's pretty amazing how much our technology is making us a victim of that stuff. And now a question is, if people are doing red light therapy, is there an optimal time? Is that as beneficial as we think it is? Is there an optimal time before, one of the known entities, and, a lot of people I talk to go, I used to live in Seattle and I was depressed all the time. Then I moved to San Diego and I'm happy now all the time. But, is that a true factor from the sun exposures? And if that's true, if you're in an area where you don't get as much sun exposure, what can we do to mitigate the damage?
Yeah, so in nature, when UV light levels are low, we're meant to get cold. Because if you think about it, anywhere that's a more northern latitude that gets very low to no UV light during the wintertime, well, what happens in the wintertime? It's also cold. And so as it turns out, when you're in the cold, it really stimulates your mitochondria very potently. And when mitochondria are stimulated, they make more of their own light. So if you get an infrared camera, you can look at somebody on it because they're emitting a lot of heat, aka infrared light. Our bodies are making a ton of infrared light, but they're not only making infrared light, they're also making UV light, UV biophotons, and there's a robust literature on this. The father of this work is called Fritz Popp. He's no longer with us, but back in like the 50s or the 40s, he was doing this work showing that essentially light is emitted from biological systems, and in particular, UV biophotons are this major feature, especially of the mitochondria, but also released from other areas of the cell as well, including the DNA, which is very interesting. So basically what nature is telling us is that if you're not getting an abundance of sunlight from nature in the form of, the summertime, like you're not getting abundance of red infrared and UV light, that you're going to make it yourself when you get cold. Like they're so essential. These inputs are so essential to the system that we got to get it one way or another. It's either from the outside in or the inside out, but it's got to get made. Now you can kind of see how that contrasts with how most people are living. Like, essentially what's happening is we're sitting indoors around like 70, 75 degrees year round with no UV light, which is very atypical because if you're typically around 70, 75 degrees, that's associated with more UV light in the environment. It's a warmer temperature. So we're actually sending very disparate inputs to the body. On one hand, low UV light is associated with wintertime and cold temperatures, but we're sitting at warm temperatures and it's really wreaking havoc on our metabolism. And temperature is actually really another important aspect of the regulation of our biology and our circadian biology in particular as well. And we know that like the body temperature needs to drop by like a couple degrees when you're getting into deep sleep, as an example, but also over the course of a year, we're really meant to experience these variations in temperatures if we're living at a more northern latitude. Of course, if you're living at a more equatorial latitude, you're going to get constant sun year round. It's like a basically fixed solar output. You're getting 12 hours of sun a day. You're getting consistent UV light throughout the year. And that light stability actually is very beneficial to the body. But this is also where the conversation of diet comes into play, because if you think about it, nature has yoked UV light availability with carbohydrate availability. So if you live somewhere like us, like let's say in New York area, we have access to carbohydrate containing foods during the summertime because they can grow here. Now, during that time of year, we're getting an abundance of light from the sun. As I mentioned earlier, that red and infrared light in particular helps to stimulate the clearance of sugar from the bloodstream. So that makes a lot of sense. But the UV light as well also really helps to structure the water in the body. And we can talk about that later if you want. And really helps to improve metabolism and again, reduce appetite so that we know that we're not going to be overeating these things. The worst thing that you can do is eat a carbohydrate rich diet indoors without UV light and without infrared light, because you're not getting that stimulus to help clear that sugar and regulate your appetite. Compare that with the wintertime. Wintertime when the ground's frozen, we don't have access to carbohydrate-rich foods. We may eat some ferments. There may be some root vegetables. There may be some berries, but it's pretty few and far between. And now that makes sense because if it's cold, we really want to be able to support our mitochondria's ability to make heat, aka infrared light. And how do we do that? Well, we know that a higher protein, higher fat diet actually helps the mitochondria to make more metabolic heat. And so that's how nature has really yoked our diets, let's say eating a seasonal diet, with our physiology and with our mitochondrial biology to help support us throughout the different seasons.
It makes sense. So sun is it helps speed the mitochondrial function. So if you have lack of sun and it's cold, then you speed the mitochondrial function because of the cold. So this would lead into like cold plunges or saunas, things like that, where our body has to compensate for that. And the mitochondria either have to conserve energy or give off extra heat energy.
Yeah, exactly. So we can leverage, I would argue that you could use cold any time of year because no matter where you are, like let's say you're in El Salvador right now, like the Pacific Ocean's right there, it's pretty much cold all year round. So I think as a human species, we've had access to cold bodies of water basically wherever we are. women gave birth in rivers and streams. Like water is a very intimate aspect to being human, I think. And there's a lot of avoidance of being cold. Partially that's because our mitochondria are suffering so deeply that we're not actually able to mount the endogenous heat production response to cold as well as we otherwise would have. But it's also a catch-22 because, for example, in hypothyroid patients, they naturally are cold averse. They want to stay out of the cold. They're told to bundle up by their doctors, like just, make yourself comfortable. However, there's actually a brown fat thyroid axis, and brown fat is a special type of fat that's stimulated by cold. When babies are born, like over 30% of their fat is this metabolically active, mitochondrially rich brown fat. And this brown fat makes a bunch of heat. It also takes up glucose and fat from the circulation. And it's specifically, it's engaged by cold. And that's important for babies because they need to regulate their core temperature. But we're actually supposed to maintain it into adulthood. But a lot of adults are walking around without any brown fat at all because they never engaged that response with cold. However, you can invoke the proliferation of brown fat, and you can also make something called beige fat, which is a brown fat-like fat cell type that can form in subcutaneous fat, like in the normal white adipose tissue, in response to cold. And so when you can engage brown fat can actually take up circulating T4, inactive thyroid hormone, and spit out T3, active thyroid hormone. So in people who are hypothyroid, the worst solution is to actually avoid cold indefinitely. You actually want to gradually increase your cold exposure to help build that brown fat, to help facilitate that conversion process, because that's going to actually allow you to get out of this this kind of this loop, this negative feedback loop that's actually hurting your thyroid function more and more over time. And of course, thyroid hormone also helps to stimulate mitochondria to make more heat. And so the more we can naturally help that process along, the more cold tolerant we can be, and the better the benefits that we will get from cold in the long term.
Yeah, because babies don't shiver because they have the brown fat, right? So
Yeah.
like we would shiver like crazy when we get in cold water, but people who are adapted to that don't have to shiver because they're able to generate that heat energy.
That's right.
Yeah, can I just my wife thought I was crazy. For the past 5 years I've been taking cold showers, and this morning,
She told me, she told you to take cold showers. That's what she told me.
yeah, of course, wife knows best. But I take cold showers this morning, actually, bright and early, maybe 8 a.m. I went running outside in 43-degree weather, completely shirtless, just with with my shorts on. And I'm running and I'm passing by my neighbor who's like all like dressed up, covered up completely, and I'm like, gosh, what a missed opportunity to get some sun and get some cold exposure. I mean, what do you go for a run for 20 minutes, 30 minutes, like it shouldn't be that big of a deal, but it looks weird, and this is what it comes back to when you talk to people.
Well,
do they get this sense that like this is all weird? What do
So
you
I
how do you
actually,
overcome that?
I, surprising as it is, I don't receive pushback. I really don't. People just seem to be very interested in these topics. They seem like they're bought in. I think, especially since COVID, a lot of people are waking up to a lot of the corruption and the ineptitudes of like the institutional structures, whether it's the NIH, the CDC, their own physicians, even in some cases. And so I think people are really hungry for information that is different and maybe unconventional, because the conventional way is not working. It's clearly not working. We need to do something different. And also, a lot of this stuff is free. So like that's another really good sign that it's actually also let's say true on some level, because we shouldn't have to be buying thousands of dollars of testing and supplements every month in order to be healthy. Like it really shouldn't be that way. We didn't have any of this stuff even just 100 years ago. It's really just a matter of getting back to our roots as a species and embracing nature in order to allow our biology to self-regulate. And when we engage in activities like that and really embrace this process, the body has an immense capacity to heal. It's pretty miraculous, actually.
yeah, and you throw into the, Tro, just so it's so ironic, or whatever we want to call it. The truth comes out. But remember all those same guys who attacked Jason Fung about fasting, now they're all pushing drugs to lose weight, like all of them, every single one of them I saw online. It's like, you wonder if they're paid off, or whether, who knows, if they're jealous of Jason or whatever. But it's really interesting when you say, look, do a natural approach. I don't have to sell you. Do I make money if you go out in the sun? Do I make money if you go swimming? Right? We have no vested interest other than making our patients healthy. And Tro and I are in a different model in that we're doing direct primary care. So the patient's paying us whether they come in or not. Right. So if we make them healthier, our lifestyle gets a little better. We could go sit in the sun in the middle of the day and things like that. But the patient's healthier. So if I get paid every time you come in, I'm going to want to see you more often. People don't understand the concept of why, Western medicine now is such a disaster, because all the doctors are trained on upcoding to make you as sick as possible on paper so they make more money. And then when you go try to get life insurance, it's a disaster. So you say, well, maybe you need to take a little break from your job, take an hour break at lunch instead of eating processed food and sugar, go for a walk in the sun. Or like you said, even eat your lunch outside. Little things like that are going to add up to benefit you. And I think a lot of us, most of the people we deal with poor metabolic health are the caregivers who worry about everyone else before themselves, so they don't have time to go sit in the sun for 10 minutes or maybe go read the Bible or read a book in the morning before you head to work, whatever it might be, because we're thinking, okay, we want to get that extra sleep. But the problem is people are staying up late watching late night TV and all this stuff, and they're cutting off, engaging in life.
Totally. And Jack talks about this all the time, like incentives dictate outcomes. And it's apparently true within medicine and within pharma and just within our industrialized healthcare system, where it's like, of course, if the incentive says that you can make more money if people are sicker, like that is what we're going to be optimizing for. We're not going to be optimizing for health, despite the fact that if we're a healthy population, we are more industrious, we're more productive, we're more creative. We can, innovate more. So I think there's a huge upshot to be had here. So it seems a bit short-sighted, let's say, and myopic to focus on, let's say, keeping people down versus lifting people up and helping them become more healthy. And as it relates to like having time for doing different things and how do you prioritize this, I always tell people just take whatever you're going to do inside and take it outside. If you're going to sit on your computer or watch Netflix or whatever, just take it outside. If you're going to read, just go outside and do it. And I often recommend, and what I do for myself is instead of spending money on like dubious supplements, I spend money, of course, on high quality food, but then also on crafting a nice outdoor space that I can enjoy, that's functional, that I like spending time in. And so that's where I really like to spend most of my money. In my area here, I've got this like patio set. I've got my Morosco forge behind, which you can't see. I've got a teepee back over here, which is like a day bed that hangs, so I can spend nice time sunbathing. I can work on my laptop in there, and just creating a nice outdoor space can be a huge, like very, very an investment that can pay back in dividends, let's say. And I think that's something that at least a lot of my clients have benefited from immensely. And a lot of people will feel differences overnight. Because, for example, when I just started blocking blue light at night, I started waking up earlier naturally, and it literally took like a couple days to happen. And so the proof is in the pudding, and people see those changes pretty rapidly. That is great buy-in.
So I meant to ask you, red light, like if people have a red light therapy and they're using, is it better to use it first thing in the morning, midday? Like, do you not want to use it before you go to bed? Does that rev you up, or is it okay anytime?
So I would say if you're going to use it, a lot of the panels have like red mode and then like near infrared mode. If you want to use it on near infrared mode in the evening, let's say, I think that's probably fine. I wouldn't use it on the red light mode because it's very bright, and both bright light and blue light can both blunt melatonin release from the pineal gland. So I would avoid doing that at nighttime. If you want to do it in the morning or sometime during the day, I would say that's also fine. And I would also say, like, there's definitely a time and place for red light devices, but it's never going to be a replacement for the sun because it's just, first of all, LED bulbs are completely different from the DC current and the light that's produced by the sun. Sunlight has a continuous spectrum that goes all the way from, the very short wavelength UVB all the way out through infrared B. All of these little wavelengths in between have a lot of functions. If you get a red light panel, at most you're getting 4 wavelengths usually, maybe 5. The sun has literally this continuous spectrum of hundreds of different of wavelengths that are each having, kind of slightly different effects on the body and on the mitochondria. And so I think the more we can leverage natural light, the better. And also during the wintertime, for example, for people who are, let's say, sicker and need more of that UV light to improve their health, if they can't afford to like go to the tropics on vacation or something like this, if they want to leverage something like a Spurdy lamp, which is like a UV light device, I recommend people just use it outside, because then you're going to naturally leverage the red and infrared light that's still present during the wintertime in the sunlight. And then you're going to get it at the same time of this, like if you're getting the vitamin D lamp, for example, it's like UVB dominant. There's some UVA as well. So you're kind of more so mimicking the light spectrum that you would receive during the, let's say, early springtime. But we really don't want to receive UV light without red and infrared light. They really are married together for a reason. And same with blue light. We're really meant to receive them all together. And so that's why I also recommend, if you're going to be inside, if you can crack windows that can let some natural light in, that's a really good way to just help round out the light spectrum indoors. You can also get specific light bulbs. So the incandescent light bulbs were actually great, and they're actually going to be completely banned as of 2028. And I'm really hoping that we can make some progress on this front before that actually happens, because there's just this lack of acknowledgement of the importance of infrared light in our biology as this essential nutrient. And the incandescent bulbs actually have an abundance of infrared light. They're mostly non-visible infrared light. And that's why they're basically being nixed, because they're seen as inefficient, because they're not bright. They're not contributing very strongly to the brightness of the room, let's say. But if you can get your hands on infrared bulbs, that's a good way to also add infrared light back in. There's a brand called Nira Lighting that was made by Scott Zimmerman, who's this great researcher actually here in New Jersey. I went and interviewed him a few weeks ago at his estate up north, and he makes these light bulbs like in his house, and they're really great. They have a 3-to-1 ratio of visible to non-visible infrared light that kind of more so mimics the light that you would receive from the sun. And so those are also ones that I like to keep around in the house. I also had Dr. Martin Moore-Eat on my podcast, who's the Circadian Light Doctor on Instagram. He wrote the book, The Light Doctor, that came out recently. And he's really been working and championing this space of the importance of mitigating blue light exposure and getting a sufficient amount of infrared light during the day from a metabolic and mitochondrial perspective. And he's actually the researcher that found the suprachiasmatic nucleus, the SCN, that master clock in the brain. He discovered that in humans back, I think it was in the 80s or the 70s. So he's been in this space for a long time. He was a professor at Harvard. Now he really is just working in like the private sector and championing these issues. But he's received a ton of pushback from the lighting industry because they're very, very focused on just lux, just a brightness. And when you're just optimizing for brightness, there are certain wavelengths that are particularly perceived by the human eye as like bright. I believe it's like yellow and green. And so if you're just optimizing for that, and you're not thinking about the health implications of the light sources that we're being exposed to, the ignorance is really, really externalizing a ton of harm to our metabolic health, to the healthcare burden, to our quality of life, ultimately.
So do you have any data on the importance of light exposure to the gut microbiome?
Yeah. So before, I didn't mention this in the intro, but before I really got into light, I was somebody who thought like the microbiome was the most important thing that nobody was talking about, like that we really needed to focus on to take things to the next level health-wise. But now my perspective is really, it also comes back to light. So there is this gut-skin axis that is activated by UVB light in particular, which is, of course, the most demonized source of light that we talked about earlier from the sun. That UVB light actually helps to directly stimulate the increase of gut microbiome diversity. And diversity is one of the only metrics I would say that we can actually say is like a good thing. Outside of that, like there are some species we might consider good, some we might consider bad. I think it's a very nuanced discussion that is being overly simplistic. I think there's no such thing as good or bad microbes per se. It really has more to do with ratios and like the functional outputs of the microbes themselves. There's also some evidence that Jack really wants us to look into. So I'm trying to build out this decentralized light lab so that we can look into this. But we want to see what kinds of light the actual microbes in the gut are making. And perhaps they're actually communicating more so by light than actually by chemicals. And that would be like a really interesting thing to know, because a lot of the metabolites that the microbiome makes are based off of tyrosine and phenylalanine and tryptophan amino acids, which are all of these aromatic amino acid residues that all happen to absorb UV light, which I just think it's a really interesting topic. So we really just want to be able to probe, essentially make a colonoscopy probe with a photomultiplier on it. That's what I'm trying to do. Doesn't sound sexy, but it would be very cool. But what we do know is essentially we can increase the diversity via the UVB light-induced gut-skin axis. And that also, there's probably a direct stimulation. I don't know if anybody's done this work yet, but because we know that near-infrared light in particular is able to penetrate all the way through the body, if you're standing outside in the sun, like from all directions, you're being penetrated by this light. And so you're really stimulating all of the mitochondria, but not all of the mitochondria, but also the microbes themselves. Because for those of the listeners that don't know, there's this theory called the endosymbiont theory, which basically states that mitochondria are derived from bacteria, and they share a lot of the same characteristics as bacteria, because bacteria are basically like the primordial ancestor of the mitochondria. And so we're also, in theory, stimulating the microbes directly with this near infrared light as well, which can impact their metabolism, but also directly influence the gut environment too. So improving and stimulating gut mitochondrial function, which of course has implications to the gut environment, to which microbes can thrive, to mucus production, things like this. So I think there's immense implications both indirectly via the gut-skin axis and also directly via the near infrared light exposure that are important. So that's kind of my take on that. And so the way that I really think about the microbiome now is like 3 pillars. A lot of people will focus on probiotics. I don't think that's the way to go. I really think that we should be focused on, number one, exposing ourselves to natural environments, because when we're exposed to that biodiversity, that's really the probiotic that we are meant to receive as a species. We just need to be exposed to a diverse array of bacteria, fungi, and viruses that then have the potential to seed in different parts of our gut and in and on our bodies, essentially. But then the next...
So like gardening, digging in the dirt.
Yes. Or just being outside, just like breathing in natural air, like you're being exposed to a ton of biodiversity that way. Then, of course, we have the gut-skin axis that helps to modulate maybe which microbes are sticking there and which have the ability to thrive. And then, of course, we have the prebiotics and the postbiotics, which is basically the diet portion. So prebiotics being like fibers, polyphenols, things like human milk oligosaccharides or HMOs, which are a potent food source for bifidobacteria. And then also our postbiotics, which are like in our fermented foods. So a lot of people think when you eat fermented foods, you're eating for the probiotics. It's actually not the case. The Sonnenberg lab showed that you actually are you're not increasing the microbes that are in the ferment in your gut. What you're actually doing is in that fermented food, when those microbes break down the prebiotics in cabbage, let's say, and sauerkraut, they make postbiotics, which are like basically what those bacteria poop out in response to eating the prebiotic. Those postbiotics then feed bacteria in your gut and help to facilitate the growth of some over others. And so the pre and postbiotics are important from the dietary standpoint, but outside of that, 2/3 of the equation is really your environment. It's your sun exposure and your exposure to nature.
So pills won't give us all that?
Yeah, I know. Shocking, right? I mean, the probiotics part of the story never really resonated, because I think in order to think that probiotics are beneficial just across the board, that means that we have figured out which microbes exactly we need to put in the body and what they're doing, which we just really don't know. There's a lot of dynamic interplay between different bacteria in the gut. Also, the fact that in order for those bacteria to actually seed within the gut and form colonies, they actually have to have the right substrates there to eat. So if we're not actually giving them the right inputs that allow them to form colonies, then they're just going to kind of go in one and out the other. And on top of that, we could actually be doing some harm. So in the case of Akkermansia, for example, which is associated with improved gut permeability and like lessening of like quote unquote leaky gut, Akkermansia elevations are also associated with Parkinson's disease. So that doesn't necessarily mean it's causal, but more may not be better. Like we really don't know.
You want to be in that balance, just like insulin.
Yes.
You don't want to have zero. You don't have tons of it. You want to have it be in that balance, or testosterone or estrogen, whatever it might be. Like if people say, well, if it's good, we want more and more of that, or less and less of that. And you go, okay, there's a physiologic place where we need to be. LDL cholesterol being one of them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's just kind of a feature of our society. On some point, it's like more is always better, and it's just not the case. And I actually think that perspective is very linked to our artificial light environments as well, because like I said, when you're not getting enough sun and you're not getting those endorphins from sunlight that are not only reducing your anxiety, pain, and depression, but they're also helping you just be more autonomous, because now you're not constantly looking for your next hit of whatever to get you by. Now you're actually you're able to operate with some level of sovereignty, versus when you're indoors under artificial light all day. The patents show that the tech companies know that blue light hijacks the dopamine system. It's highly addictive. And when you're sitting on that all day and you're also under these lights that are blasting blue light, you're basically being turned into some sort of a zombie, essentially, that is constantly looking for more of something. You're never satiated, whether it's food or drugs, alcohol, or whatever it is. You're constantly in lack, and you're constantly compulsively looking for your next hit of whatever. And so when we're in that state, of course, we think like we need more and more and more. It's like the hungry monster that just constantly needs more, versus being able to think about things more objectively and critically. And Jack talks about this all the time, where it's like our deficit in critical thinking is also directly related to the light environment via this mechanism. Because if we're constantly low dopamine status, we're not able to critically think about our situations, our health, our society, our politics, or anything. We're just basically being hijacked by our tech and made to kind of be slaves to it in a certain way. And so that's why I really focus at a very fundamental level. I focus on all of this light stuff first and just getting people outside and blocking blue light at night. Because once you just gain that little bit of momentum, now people can start to see more clearly in other aspects of their lives. And that can improve just everything. Like my life has entirely changed since I went down this path. Like the people I associate with, the types of conversations I'm having, my work, my initiatives, what I have planned for my future, who's being coming into my life. Like I've connected with so many incredible people since coming into like the quantum biology and the light work, that it really can change just about every aspect of your life when you start dialing this stuff in. And I mean, on the more spiritual aspect of it, I feel like it really just helps you put you into more alignment with source, God, whatever you want to call it, so that you can see your life more clearly and what's meant for you and what's not meant for you.
Amen.
So true. I was just out with my neighbor who happens to be atheist, and we're talking. He goes, Brian, the one time I believe in God was when I look up at the stars or I look at the sunrise. He goes, that I feel so connected, and I feel like there has to be more than what I'm seeing. And I'm like, that's a cool opening, right? But that's true. I mean, if you sit next to a waterfall, you see the force and the energy. You go, wow, this is just wild. Like it's overwhelming. And so I think that the more we get exposed to it, but like we said at the onset, they lock these poor people in the house, no sun exposure, no exposure to your family and friends, no physical contact, no facial expressions, all that stuff, and it has a huge impact on us, and watching the news 24/7 thinking you're going to die of this thing. Now, Hal Cranmer, who runs a senior facility in Phoenix, he had his people in the backyard sitting in the sun at least 20 minutes a day, all seniors, playing catch, playing ball, playing games, not watching TV, and he had 0 hospitalizations for COVID in this elderly population. You go, okay, there's something to that. That's anecdotal. And people say, where's the randomized controlled trial? But it's common sense when you say, look, how do we live all these thousands of years until now? And you go, there's some common sense to that. Go out and enjoy the sun. Sit outside like you are right now. I'm relaxed just looking at your setting behind you, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think about this a lot with regards to like the night sky and how the light pollution at night is kind of like spiritual warfare, because it's disconnecting us from our place in the cosmos. And you can actually directly see like increase in light pollution, decrease in religious belief, decrease in spirituality among our population. And so I think this really goes quite deep outside of our physiological and our mitochondrial health, but also our like spiritual health and just having a feeling of having a place in the universe and having a sense of awe. Like imagine our ancestors basically every night could go outside and just experience this wonder and awe every night. And we also know that our ancestors tracked the stars very religiously, and almost every ancient monument is aligned in some way with a constellation, calculated in like the precession of the equinox, and all of these intricate aspects of our cosmos that we're just completely detached from now. And there was one other thing I wanted to say in response to what you said. I think you said something about the elders sitting outside. Maybe it'll come back to me if anybody has a question.
Playing catch, engaging, laughing, oxytocin release, all that stuff.
I got one thing to mention, and the contrarian in me, and like, look, we have direct data on sleep deprivation and its impact on mitochondrial health and glucose tolerance. We have data on the light environment and its impact on those. But if you ask me, and this is just maybe my my contrarian nature, think about what is so deeply associated with getting great light exposure, right? What is associated with getting, being outside, getting sun, right? It's being away from the liquor cabinet and the refrigerator, right?
And your computer and your phone and whatever it is, like you're away from all this.
But if you think about it, right, it is, if you are outside getting sun, you are away from the pantry, the refrigerator, the liquor cabinet, right? And I wonder to what degree that synergistic effect of being outdoors and avoiding our modern food is, I'd imagine there's a great synergy there.
Yeah, I mean, actually you reminded me of what I was going to say too, which kind of links to this, that nature isn't subject to our randomized controlled trials because nature is the status quo. We actually the burden of proof should be on us to prove that our modern behaviors are safe, not that nature is not good for us somehow, or nature is good for us. Like that should be the baseline, just because as a species, we came up in this environment. So there are certain inputs that we just are kind of ignorant of in regards to light and also grounding, that are just these essential forces that help to shape health in our species. And we know that, the burden of chronic ailments and all these chronic Neolithic diseases are a modern occurrence. Like, our ancestors did not deal with this. But it's actually pretty interesting. If you look at like Egyptian royalty, they did have some cardiovascular disease and cancer. And what were they doing? They were sitting outside all day, with a working class worked outdoors in the sun, and they didn't die of those reasons. But, they may have died of like traumatic injuries and things like that.
Yeah.
And of course, our modern medical system is great for the acute, like saving lives and, doing surgeries and things like this. Like, there are some absolutely life-saving aspects to modern medicine. But when it comes to the chronic disease burden, it's just completely in the bed, if I may say that. And I think we just need to come to terms with that. I think we are coming to terms with that. And I do think there's absolutely, like, there's both direct negative harms and there's also harms of absence. So, like, not going out in the sun is bad for you, but also sitting indoors under the artificial light, drinking alcohol, and sitting on screens is also bad for you. So the more we can do the things that are good for us.
While eating heart healthy, tricks and ice cream, right? So
yeah. Oh yeah.
Don't forget that.
But I mean,
Cheerios.
as Jack would say, and I believe him on this, if you eat your junk food outside, now suddenly your body has the capacity to even process that. So obviously it's still suboptimal, but at least you can now clear that sugar. It's not lingering in your bloodstream, and you're not harming your mitochondria to the same extent that you would be if you were sitting indoors under artificial light without sunlight eating those foods. So it's really a double whammy, the fact that we're eating these and we're indoors. But again, it's also not a surprise, because we're like basically low dopamine. We're craving these hyperpalatable foods because we're not in the sun. It's not like, I personally feel like the more time I spend outside, and I've been on this journey for almost 2 years now, I don't have cravings. Like, I really don't. Actually, my appetite is quite low, especially during the day. And so I think most people do realize that, especially my clients who come to me for like weight loss issues, that they experience naturally like reduction in their cravings. They feel more energetic. They want to move their bodies more. They recover from exercise better. I mean, something that I talk about quite a bit is in the context of fitness and working out outside, is the absolute synergy that happens when you have your bare feet on the earth, on the grass, lifting weights in the sun, or doing sprints in the sun, or running outside. Like, this is amazing, because not only are you getting free electrons from the earth via grounding, so there's eccrine sweat glands on the palms of our hands and the bottoms of our feet that allow us to form a direct electrical connection with the earth that gives our body free negative charge, free electrons. And those electrons can directly power mitochondrial metabolism. In addition to that, we're also in the sunlight from UVA light, which we didn't talk about earlier, but UVA light directly stimulates the production of nitric oxide within the skin, and that can diffuse into the bloodstream. Nitric oxide is a primary stimulus of vasodilation. Vasodilation is required for nutrient and oxygen delivery to tissues, as well as waste removal from tissues. And a lot of gym bros will take nitric oxide boosters before a workout in order to get a better pump in. Well, if you just did your workout outside, you can get a ton of nitric oxide. And the key to that is the more skin you expose to that UVA light, the more of a pump and the more nitric oxide production you get, because that UVA light production of nitric oxide is local. So basically, the more skin you have exposed, the more you produce. In combination with that, we're of course also getting the direct stimulation of muscle mitochondria and other mitochondria with that red and infrared light to help produce more energy in mitochondria, which can help to support the lifting or whatever exercise you're doing. And the final piece that we didn't talk about is the human photosynthetic piece, which actually shows, there's literature on this to show that when sunlight hits your skin, melanin can split neighboring water molecules. Melanin is the pigment that makes your skin tan, or, if you have dark skin, that's the pigment that's making it dark. That melanin can split water molecules to make molecular hydrogen, molecular oxygen, and 4 free electrons per water molecule. And those free electrons can power mitochondria. Oxygen serves as a terminal electron acceptor within mitochondria. That respiration, that's basically why we have to breathe in oxygen, is because our mitochondria need that oxygen to take the electrons and siphon them away, allow the electron transport chain to keep working. And the hydrogen is also really important, not only in the mitochondria, which forms the battery. Mitochondria literally are batteries that separate positive charge hydrogen protons from negative charge electrons. That separation of charge is what powers the movement of electrons and the production of energy. But in addition to that, molecular hydrogen is also a very potent antioxidant as well that helps to reduce inflammatory burden. And so when we get our skin in the game, as Jack would say, we get our skin out in the sunlight, we're also leveraging this direct human photosynthetic piece to power our cells to reduce inflammatory burden. And that requires melanin. And so this idea that there's no such thing as a healthy tan is the biggest piece of BS that you could ever imagine if you just actually look at the data as it relates to melanin biology and how powerful it is. It's a really powerful free radical scavenger. It's a really powerful detoxer of heavy metals. It pulls heavy metal out of the bloodstream and can sequester it into the skin and other parts of the body that have melanin. There are many parts of the body that have melanin, including the substantia nigra, which is the primary dopamine producing portion of the brain that's defected in Parkinson's disease. And when you learn about this story, you can really see like, wow, sunlight deficiency and UV light deficiency is a major driver of Parkinson's disease because you need the production of alpha, beta, gamma, MSH, melanocyte stimulating hormone, to stimulate the production of melanin, not only in your skin, but in all the parts of your body that require melanin. And so if the body becomes a very reactive place, especially in the brain, if the mitochondria become weakened and damaged from all the artificial light, from all the poor quality foods, from all of the toxins in the environment, the forever chemicals, the heavy metals, etc., now that melanin in the substantia nigra and the locus coeruleus can basically be used as a way to sequester the reactivity in the environment, but as a result, it's becoming broken down over time. And if you're not stimulating the production of new melanin, now it's breaking down, and we can see in Parkinson's disease that breakdown of that melanin is a feature, especially of the advanced condition. So,
oh, gosh, you want to smear benzone all over you to protect you from all that, you know?
Yeah, especially the chemical sunscreens are just a big joke because now we see that like benzene and all of these other chemicals in the sunscreens can also facilitate skin cancers. But what we're not understanding
and endocrine
also,
disruptors, and their endocrine disruptors freely absorbed onto your children.
Yes.
Right?
Yes, but also sunscreens in general, even a physical sunscreen is bad because we're now distorting the solar spectrum. And so if we're preferentially blocking UV light using sunscreen, what does our body think? It's winter time now. So, but what's
Store
happening?
fat.
Store fat. Store
winter
fat,
time coming
like
up.
it should be cold also though. So we're getting this dissonance. And as Jack would say, like we're creating an alien light spectrum that our body doesn't know how to interpret. And that doesn't mean you need to go out and burn yourself and fry yourself. That means when you feel like you're getting too much sun, you go in the shade. Shade is nature's sunscreen. If you can't go in the shade, there may be a time and place for a physical barrier like hats, clothing, etc. But physical sunscreens, like mineral sunscreens, there's very few and far between use cases for those. Some examples would be like
put benzone all over me and my kids. So, you know.
Yeah, we know they're always right.
Yeah.
But yeah, like surfers, sailors, like they may have a use for things like glasses, sunglasses, and sunscreens occasionally, but that's not, the general public does not need those things because the general public is not in those very extreme conditions.
So if you're going for a hike or you're going to do something, you don't necessarily, it's better not to wear the sunglasses then.
Oh yeah.
Generally.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Because we need that UV light input into both the eyes and the skin at the same time to get that coordinated POMC production response that unlocks all of those cleavage products that helps us to make new melanin in response to the sun, which means that we can tan instead of burn. And I have had literally dozens of people message me on Instagram being like, I stopped wearing sunglasses and now I don't burn. And it's like, this is also like first principles analysis. This makes complete sense. We don't have the RCT, so people are going to say it's, bunk, but it's just, again, I don't think we need an RCT to prove that nature is healthy for us and that this stuff makes sense if we can work it out with first principles. But I mean, if somebody wants to do the study, by all means, I probably will do it at some point just to shut people up, but like it makes perfect sense.
There's really interesting anecdotal data on that. When people cut out seed oils, they say they don't get sunburn anymore. They can tolerate the sun way better. Even our friends who are like Tucker Goodrich, I always wanted to call him Tucker Carlson, but he, he cut out, he's fair skinned, a ginger, and he said, I don't get sunburn at all anymore. So it's kind of interesting. You wonder what the oxidative stress and all these things that are happening. And then, that we're afraid of the sun and we're afraid of going out during the day. And, I see people totally covered up with umbrellas and masks and hats and, oh my goodness. Like,
I know, it's pretty
enjoy
incredible.
life a little bit.
Pretty incredible where we've gotten to as a society.
I want to step back because you started with this and I know Brian's like, gosh, he's probably got another podcast waiting, but, here's the thing. We talked about, the need for change, and you mentioned Kennedy and you mentioned Shanahan. And one of my fears is that people who are heavily invested in the supplement industry, the athletic greens promoters, the mango honey glazed salad makers are going to co-opt the movement of true metabolic health, thinking about, proper nutrition, thinking about what's in our food supply. And we should be very clear, with 90% of the United States population suffering metabolic syndrome, I think enemy number one really needs to be processed carbohydrates, sugar. And I think number two is movement. Number three is all the contaminants in our life, or lack of sleep, being four, maybe five also being the sun, lack of sleep and sun environment. We'll lump those together. Do you share with me this fear? And then we should talk about experimental therapies that are being forced on our children. But do you think that my heuristics here are off? Do you think that we should flip this order, and maybe should I be, accepting of the Athletic Greens CEO and the salad, the wholesome salad maker CEO? Like, what's your take on the people who are talking about metabolic health right now in the public sphere?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's just me, but I'm not too worried about that. I think most people's gateway drug into health is food or diet or movement. It just depends. Most people don't come at this through light. They'll end up finding it later. I don't think that necessarily has to be the case. I think it's just because we've been so programmed as a society to think everything is diet and exercise related, and that you just need to move more and eat less, that's the answer, that we have kind of this idea, even though it's not working for us and we're fatter than ever. So there's that. But I think whatever gets people thinking about their health is a good thing. But that's not to say, like, I don't take Athletic Greens and I don't support them. I think that I don't even like that product personally. But I'm pretty hopeful, I would say, because I mean, in particular, I'm directly in contact with Nicole and helping to educate her on this stuff. And so is Jack. Jack is directly in the ear of Kennedy and Nicole and Trump. And he wrote a whole constitutional amendment for El Salvador for decentralized medicine. And Kennedy asked for that amendment so that he could help incorporate it into what they got planned for us. So I'm very hopeful on that front. I don't think it's going to be co-opted. I think the people involved, their hearts are in the right place. They are being exposed to the right types of information to really come to a logical diagnosis of the problem and be able to enact positive change in that front. But at the same time, I do still see a lack of rhetoric around the light environment. And I don't know if it's because it's a very inconvenient truth. So much of our society is built around tech, is built around operating 24/7 and being industrious 24/7, and working night shifts and working in jobs that require you to be inside all day and things like this, that if people were to really start rapidly waking up about this stuff, like, it becomes very problematic, because now what are they supposed to quit their jobs and work from home and things like this. Like, I do see the struggles that may come, but at the same time, even making small changes makes a huge benefit in somebody's life. And I mean, let's face it, most people are working jobs that they don't like. Vast majority of people are. And so if just gaining a small amount of momentum in their health and their clarity and their cognitive function and critical thinking helps them to make the leap they need to make in order to live a life that's more fulfilling for them, then I'm all for that. And I think there is kind of this, at least the sense I get, is kind of like a mass awakening to just the whole systemic issues that we're facing and how change is kind of inevitable. And it's kind of like the death rattles of the institution right now. I feel like they're just clinging on for dear life, but I think it's inevitable that change is coming, and it's only just a matter of time. I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah, and I'm so glad you mentioned that too. I mean, it's such a great answer. And also, when you mentioned El Salvador, I used to do a lot of medical missions to El Salvador. It was the scariest place I've ever been to, in San Salvador. And so I said, I'm never going back. And then all of a sudden during COVID lockdowns, these guys were running, their public health is the only ones in the world that I'm aware of, was saying, exercise, get outside, drink water, eat healthy food, cut out the processed food. And no one else in the world, no other public. That's why I was so frustrated with their public health, never talking about any of these things that you're talking about that are so important. They're the history of the human race. And it was controversial to say, look at what El Salvador is recommending. They're telling people to go outside and exercise and not just be locked in your little cubicle staring at the computer all day or your TV. And it's amazing, and they were saying cut out processed foods. Well, we're pushing processed foods, and our processed food sales are going up during this whole time. And so it's just so amazing that no one else in the world knew the benefits of metabolic health during this whole crisis. It's shocking. Sorry,
yeah, it
Charles.
definitely showed their hand. I would say that they lost all the trust basically, and now it's just like the pretty quick demise, I would say. And like even during the lockdowns, I remember going for walks because obviously I'm like a dissident at heart, so I'm never listening to rules I don't think are relevant to me. But anyway, I'm walking around and I'm seeing all the parks, the local parks have caution tape all over them, literally, so the kids couldn't go outside and play. And that's just
Basketball hoops are
criminal.
taken
Yes!
off, and they put wood over them so you couldn't play.
Yes!
It's amazing.
Insane, absolutely insane.
But Tro supported all that. Tro was all for that.
Joking.
I'm joking.
I'm super offended. One of the times, a quick story before we go, I was out hiking with my kids during the pandemic, and none of us had masks on. And we're walking in this really nature, like a remote nature scene. There's nobody there, and we passed a couple with a dog, and they're masked, and they look at us and they said, "How could you not be masked? How irresponsible." And I said, "Look at your dog." I was like, "COVID, spreads in animals just like it does in humans." I was like, "You should be ashamed of yourself leaving your dog unmasked." And they grabbed their dog and and my kids had a chuckle. But what's sad is, I had to tell my kids hey, look, critical thinking and thinking sort of, not everybody is doing this. Not everybody can do this. Not everybody has opportunity to think these things through, and just be patient and, just be compassionate to people who just may be learning or may not be where you guys are. And, it was a real struggle on them, And I'd imagine, Dr. Cowan, I'm learning so much from you, and I know Brian's learning so much from you. It must be a struggle for you because a lot of people probably don't know this information and they're just starting to hear about it. And I'm glad you are who you are, doing what you are doing, because you've taught me. And I'm guessing taught Brian as well. And
yeah, we'll have to listen back to that because I'm gonna go. I'm trying to write it down. Let me get all this in here.
What I'd love is
amazing.
If you can shoot, I'm sure you have a stash of this as a PhD. Primary articles that you think every person should read, maybe 5, maybe 10 on light. We will put them in the show notes, and our listeners will go and read them. So if you can shoot over those things, those articles that I know the sleep deprivation article on insulin resistance would be a great one, and or glucose tolerance. But anything that you find makes the point, we would love that, and we'd love to share that with our audience. And I just appreciate you taking the time and joining us on your Friday. You could be doing anything right now, so we appreciate you and your time.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. I definitely have articles that I can share. I think people are ready for the information. Like I said before, I also wrote an ebook for all newbies who are completely new to this that basically outlines everything in layman's terms, walks you through the logical steps of what to do and the basic science around light and water and grounding and magnetism, which we didn't talk about, but as it relates to mitochondrial health and just all the basic changes that they can make in their lives to just begin to build some momentum in the positive direction. And then, of course, there's always more nuance to dive into, but I think for the basic stuff, I've gotten really good feedback about that. So I did that a couple months ago, and so that's available for people through my Instagram page.
How do people get that?
Yeah, Doc. Yeah, how do people track you down? That's always going to be my question too.
Yeah. So I'm mostly active on Instagram, but I'm also becoming more active on X because Instagram censorship is just out of control. But I'm at Dr. Alexis Jasmine, JAZMYN on Instagram, same handle on X, and my website you can also find through my Instagram or my X page, And my entire business is basically based off of social media right now, which is why I'm also pretty intent on getting over to X too, because if my page gets taken out, that would absolutely suck. Because I have a lot of content there and a lot of repertoire built up with like thousands of people who I've interacted with over the past few years. And I'm really passionate about sharing this information. I think it's not only very important from a health standpoint, but it's also just extremely intellectually stimulating for me. I think it's just so interesting. And also shocking because it's just not being talked about, despite there being literature going back decades on the topic. And so, despite the inconvenience of the light narrative, let's say, for the centralized systems, the actual centralized science actually supports everything that I've shared with you guys today and everything that Jack talks about. And so, I think it's kind of funny and ironic in that way, but I'm very hopeful for the future. I'm excited to get some decentralized research done in my future lab, hopefully within the next couple of years. And yeah, thanks again for having me on. I think this was really fun, and hopefully we can do it again.
Yeah, it's awesome stuff. Thank you so much for your expertise on this. And, I don't know why tech would be upset about you saying stay away from tech and go outside and go live your life, right? And so that's against the community standards apparently. And, and everyone listening, I would say, look, Tro and I have been saying it. It's not just about what you're eating, right? Obviously, cut out the processed food and all this stuff, but you got to think about going on the sun and enjoying life, getting your oxytocin levels up, lowering your stress hormones down, getting your sleep. All these things we're talking about are so critical. And it's not all about low carb, right? It's not all about that. It's about this metabolic health and like, how do we maximize? We're all trying to figure this out. How do we make our mitochondria function at the level where our brain isn't depressed and anxious? Like, people think that when you get older, you should just be decrepit and, sitting in a chair somewhere. But we have people in their 80s, and I have a lady who's 88 years old who just came to me as a new patient, and she's still out hiking and doing stuff. And so, it's never too late. But think about these things, because a lot of us, myself included, have been in these jobs where you're working 18-hour days, you're stressed, you're tense, you're not sleeping. Inherently, it's not good for you, but you still do it. So working to make changes in that, and we're all trying to do that. And I'm going to go outside as soon as we're done.
Amen.
Yay!
But Doc, thank you. It's an absolute pleasure, and thanks for everything you're doing. When you come out with your book, let us know, and we'll have you come back on and talk about this stuff, because it's so critically important.
If you're ever in the North Jersey area, we got to have a steak together.
Please.
Processed grass-fed steak. We can eat outside, so that'll work.
Great.
Or you can come to San Diego or Arizona, where we have real sun. You don't need to generate it.
Well, Arizona's dead. There's no magnetic flux there, and all of California's got electrosmog. So.
Oh man! All right.
Yeah, and
there's give and
not
takes.
to mention the communists, right? But yeah. Sorry.
Troy just got us all taken off everything, but it's fun. We enjoyed it. So We'll get this out. I want to get this out, Tro.
All right.
Soon.
Yeah, we'll get it. Absolutely. This was fun. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks so much.
If you enjoy the show, please consider supporting us on Patreon by going to lowcarbmd.com.